today I'm going to be watching this video. It's called 5 Weird Things About Life in Sweden. Now, yeah, I always enjoy watching videos like this to find out about people's experiences in different countries, especially foreigners, opinions or experiences, observations. Being a foreigner in another country, I'm Scottish, living in Malaysia. There's a lot of weird things about life here in Malaysia. Culture shocks I've experienced. I always like to see other people's, see if any are relatable, and also for people in Sweden, you can tell me what you think about these as well. Are they weird to you? Is there other weird things in Sweden that people should know about? Let's watch this one first.
Every once in a while, I come across things in my life that are just different. As someone that is born and raised in America for the first 22 years of my life and then moved to Sweden and am now a Swedish citizen, there's still things to this day that strike me as peculiar. And being that this channel is really focused on talking about cultural differences between countries, anytime I experience enough of these differences, I jot them down in my notes. And when I have enough of them all together, I bring them to you guys on this channel of things that I've noticed that are just a little bit weird, specifically in this video about Swedish society. So without further ado, let's talk about these things that are uniquely Swedish. This first difference is rather simple, but it can lead to a lot of confusion, especially this time of year, because this is the time of year where everyone is telling their employers what days or weeks they want to take off for vacation in the summertime. Well, we can leave aside the fact that people in Sweden get a lot more summer vacation or just vacation days in general compared to people in the US. I've already discussed that on this channel. But in terms of actually reporting the days or weeks that you're going to be off, in Sweden, every week has a number. Whereas in the US, we simply don't number our weeks. And for me, this is very confusing when I ask somebody, when are you going to be off in the summer? And they say, oh, week 34 to week 37. And I'm like, what month is that?
I've never heard
what,
of this
what
before,
days
actually.
are that? Like, for me, coming from the US, it still causes confusion for me, which is quite funny. You'd think I would get used to it by now. The only time of the year where actually counting the weeks still makes sense in my head is like right after New Year's. I'm like, yeah, it's week 1, it's week 2, I can keep track. But this whole like week 35, week 37, the summer schedules, maybe it's not even 35, 37, maybe it's in the 20s. That just goes to show how clueless I am about counting weeks. So that to me is very different in Sweden. But if you're from another country that also counts weeks like this, let me know in the comments section, because I'm curious if this is just a Swedish thing or if it's just a not American thing. This second one.
Yeah, so I'm from Scotland, I'm from the UK. I've never even heard of that before, never mind us not practicing that there. So is that a very uniquely Swedish thing? Does it happen in any other countries? Is there any benefit to it? Again, like if we're taking holidays and things, I guess you just click from what date to the other date. What do you think about the amount of annual leave do you get in Sweden? Do you think you should get more? Do you think it's a really good amount? And yeah, where do you go for your holidays? Where do Swedish people like to go for the holidays? Like British people, the stereotype is places like Spain, Turkey. What about Swedish people? Where do you go? Is there any nice places in Sweden that you like to visit for your annual leave?
One is pretty funny, but I think that this one also says a lot about the culture on a deeper level. And this is the concept of provanställning, or trial employment, if we would translate it into English. In Sweden, it's a lot more difficult to fire a permanent employee. Businesses have to document a bunch of things and jump through a lot of hoops if they want to fire someone who is underperforming. Generally, in the US, it's a lot easier to fire someone. Now, keep in mind, this could vary from industry to industry, but as a general rule, it's much easier to fire somebody in the US than it is in Sweden. But in Sweden, you have this 6 months of trial employment. And pretty much during this first 6 months of trying out a new employee, the business can let them go if it's not working out. It was quite interesting because we had a new employee come into our company who is just a superstar. She does such an amazing job at everything. And I remember she'd been working with us for about 5 months. And she goes, you know, I'm kind of nervous. I'm still on my trial employment period and I have to stay on for 1 more month in order to convert it to a more permanent employment. And I thought to myself, you're doing such an amazing job. I don't think there's any reason that you should be worried about that. Then I got to thinking to myself a little bit about my own mindset and what it would mean to work a job in the US. And pretty much in that situation, your entire career is a trial employment period, because if you're not doing well, it's much easier to be let go. Whereas in Sweden, you have this sense of security once you're permanently employed, which you see translates to a very relaxed and secure work environment in Sweden, whereas in the US, people are always pushing and working hard, working extra hours, going above and beyond outside of their work hours. So I think this concept alone, and the fact that it's harder to fire someone in Sweden, really contributes to this work-life balance that a lot of Swedish employees have, versus the hustle mentality, which is really ingrained in American culture. This next one is...
Yeah, so that one, I actually thought that was kind of normal. I've not worked in the UK for over 13 years, so I can't actually remember if it's the case there, but I know for sure here in Asia, Malaysia, China, there's always some sort of, they call it more like a probationary period, which is sometimes 3 months. I don't know if I've heard it as long as 6 months. Is it always 6 months in Sweden? Which I feel like it has pros and cons. Like the pros are, I mean, for the person, is it gives you a bit of impetus to work harder, get yourself off to a good start in a company because you feel like you've got something to try and achieve or to try and get that full-time contract. So it kind of gives you that push. The con is obviously it gives you a bit less job security. You don't feel like you're a permanent employee. So maybe you feel, some people might feel a bit more pressure. I actually never have minded it when I've started new jobs. You just got to get on with it and work as hard as you can to get off to a good start and then get that contract as well. But tell me what you think about it. Do you think it's a good practice? Would you prefer just to get that contract immediately, the full-time contract immediately? Would that ever happen as well? Is it always 6 months or sometimes 3 months?
Something that I've never fully adjusted to, let's be honest. Now, there are elements of this which are very nice. In the wintertime in Sweden, we all know that it gets very cold and very dark. But one thing that Swedes are really good at is making the meal times very cozy, very comfortable. They like to light candles, make it mysig is the word in Swedish for making it cozy and a nice vibe. I, for one, really enjoy the mysig vibe. But the one area where I find that it can be a little bit strange is when it comes to eating meals. So imagine this. You're at home with your Swedish partner. One of you has been working hard in the kitchen for a long time to prepare a meal that looks absolutely stunning. You plate it up, you put it on your plate, but then right before you're about to eat, you turn all the lights off and light a single candle. This has happened to me many times, and I look at my plate and I can barely make out the food. I have to like sort of squint to try to figure out
Do you ever have it that dark?
This to me has happened time and time again throughout my time in Sweden. Although this mysig feeling is very cozy and it's amazing to light candles, I feel like I just need a little bit more light to enjoy my food properly. If there was a light with a dimmer switch, then maybe, not having it at the full dimness, but a little bit brighter. I don't want to eat in a completely bright room, and I think there is something to be said about a cozy ambiance, but I think Swedes are comfortable with having the light level a little bit lower than I'm comfortable with when it comes to eating. This next...
Yeah, have you ever eaten your dinner in that level of darkness where you can hardly see the plate? That sounds like, that sounds a bit challenging. For me, I definitely prefer low light, those warm lights, candles, things like that. I prefer to feel cozy and comfortable in my environment, even when I'm eating dinner and things like that. It's different here in Asia. Most families prefer like bright white lights and for everywhere to be super bright. Like it's actually a bit anxiety inducing sometimes for me. I prefer the Swedish way, definitely. Maybe not as far as like pitch black where I can't see my dinner, but that kind of low, comfortable lighting definitely suits me.
Next difference is very interesting to me as someone that has just recently become a Swedish citizen. And that is the difference in if you were to say you wanted to give up one of your citizenships. The US is a country that taxes you over the entire world. I mean, there are rules in place that you can deduct some taxes from the country that you're living in against what you would have to pay in the US. But the US is a country that's very unique in that you have to file a tax return even if you haven't lived in the US for years and years and years. Just the fact that you're a US citizen means that you have to file your taxes there. So there's a lot of wealthy individuals that consider giving up their US citizenship, especially if they have another passport. I don't think I could ever give up my US citizenship, but out of curiosity, I looked into what are the implications if someone wanted to give up their US citizenship, or on the other side, if someone was Swedish and wanted to give up their Swedish passport. If an individual decides to give up US citizenship, it clearly states that you can never become a US citizen ever again. They sort of have this policy that you're either with us or you're not with us, and if you decide that you're not with us, then that's it. In Sweden, if you decide to give up your Swedish citizenship, it doesn't really seem like they're as harsh if you want to become Swedish again. Not only can you become Swedish again if you want to, but you'll actually be fast-tracked and have a faster process than people that have never been Swedish before. In terms of rules and punishments, the US can seem like it's a little bit more of a harsh culture compared to Sweden. Whereas in Sweden, things are just more relaxed and people are more forgiving. And you see also the difference in Swedish and American prisons, which I also discussed in a previous video on my channel. That said, the cultural differences are quite interesting. The last weird difference that I want to point out in this video is when it comes to advertising, and specifically when it comes to advertising alcohol in Sweden. According to Swedish law, you're not really allowed to advertise alcohol. So what do the beer companies do, or the alcohol companies in Sweden do? They advertise their product, which is 0.0% alcohol. I think it's kind of funny because everybody knows when you see an ad for Norrlands Gold, a 0.0, that it's just a way of their actual beer being top of mind, and it's just their way of going around the rules and, abiding by the rules. But it's weird because in the US, or most other countries, I believe for that matter, you can just advertise alcohol. It's not a big deal. But Sweden has a very special relationship with alcohol, and I've discussed this many times with their Systembolaget stores, their state-run liquor stores that control the sales of alcohol. And on the flip side, America is kind of weird how we have our commercials for prescription drugs quite often that you can ask your doctor about, and then you watch a commercial and there'll be a big list of warnings and side effects that they have to verbally say on the commercial. I've never really seen a commercial like that in Sweden, but I do think it's a little weird that in Sweden they have these advertisements for 0.0% alcoholic beverages, and in the US it's weird that they advertise prescription drugs. So guys, those were the top 5.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I've seen people mention that from the US before who don't realize how much they get promoted or advertised to about prescription drugs until they actually leave, go to another country and see that there's just basically no adverts for that type of thing. But yeah, interesting little loophole there to get around the alcohol advertising there in Sweden. That's interesting. So is there legislation that means that you can't promote alcohol? Is that why they do that? And I guess would they not just close that loophole off so it stops that completely? Maybe they can't because it's not classified as alcohol, I don't know. But yeah, interesting differences there between Sweden and the USA. Tell me what you think about these. Thanks.